G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle, and today we're going to do a slightly different video. I want to talk about three distinct things today. The first is the what-ifs and possibilities of swapping Horus Heresy over to 9th edition 40k. The second is some quality control issues that have come out of Forge World recently. And the third thing is some Chaos Dwarf rumours, which I've had a couple of people approach me about, and another one on Instagram today that messaged me, and I thought, you know what, I do want to talk about it a little bit. But anyway, to begin with, Horus Heresy going to 9th edition. Well, for a start, I don't want it to, so that's an immediate bias. The reason why, though, has changed a little bit from my feelings that I had when it was 8th edition 40k. So 8th edition 40k, for those who aren't familiar with my opinion on it, was not a good edition of 40k. It was highly flawed, especially when it came to bigger scale games. I found that a lot of the changes were not necessary, and they were marketing gimmicks that people fell for. Now, whether I'm right or wrong on that doesn't matter, that's how I feel about that. And I felt that a lot of the tactical nuance of the game was lost in favour of these hero-centric area effect auras, which is still something that, to a degree, is very present in 9th edition, as well as the command points conundrums. Now, 9th edition is very much improved over 8th edition in that regard, but I still don't want it. And I know there are some people, definitely outspoken people in the heresy community, who do want it. And I'm not sure why, because my problem with it is that the 7th edition rule set, the Horus Heresy is currently basically verbatim based on, is a flawed rule set, but it works, and it's a pretty good rule set. The things that are flawed in it are not things like movement values or shooting stats, things like that. No, the things that don't work in 7th edition 40k were the obviously the psychic phase. There are some special rules that need to be completely changed up. The types of missions at times can be a pain in the ass, but thankfully Horus Heresy had its own. 7th edition honestly was killed by Decurions, formations, data slates, detachments, that external force organization chart breaking stuff that ruined the rule set so comprehensively they had no choice but to do 8th edition. And coming so hot on the heels of 7th edition, I think the hard sell with 8th edition was, how do we make people want this? And the way they did it was saying, hey, it's radically changed up, we're bringing back some mechanics from 2nd edition, ignoring the fact that a lot of those mechanics were discarded in 2nd edition when they went to 3rd edition because they were too clunky. Alright, that's a bit of a word soup. Anyway, 7th edition, flawed, but pretty good overall for Horus Heresy. Again, I've spoken about in length the 6 key things that I would change. Gameplay-wise, talking about things like warlord traits, psychic powers, and night fighting. Sort of the 3 biggest things gameplay-wise. 9th edition. Now, 9th edition is not a bad edition. But the problem I have with 9th edition is it's still a flawed edition. It's still got problems. And I don't see any tangible benefit in swapping over from Heresy as it is to Heresy 9th edition when those flaws are just getting imported over with it. Especially because you're superseding all of the very, very expensive books that people already have entirely in favor of a new edition. And that's a very hard sell. You're talking $100 to $200 books across the board that people have paid for. We've been paying for them for 10 years nearly. We don't necessarily want that all written over. And I don't see any tangible gain in going to 9th edition. And again, there are things that 9th edition gets really right. So let's give it its credit. You know, it is not a terrible edition. It's not an edition I am into, but that does not make it a bad edition, and it is not. People seem to get the 2 concepts mixed up when I dump on something that I think deserves it versus just how I feel about it. So, that's some thoughts I have there. The people who want it to swap over, I don't think have thought that far ahead. I think they just prefer the 9th edition rule set and therefore think that everything will just neatly carry across and be packaged up into it, and they don't have to use any brain cells whatsoever to use a different rule set because, it's just too hard knowing two different systems. I mean, I've been playing this game since 2nd edition 40k, and I'm able to grasp new editions easily enough, and I've never had a problem with understanding how to use ballistic skill charts and weapon skill charts. I've never needed flat to hit charts and ignoring initiative abilities, and no. Silly. So I don't think the logic and reasoning is there. I think the people who want it just have a fixation with it. Okay, so moving on. I saw a lot of images of bad quality control coming out of Forge World in the last week or two. And I put out a little feeler to some people, but it was very minor feeler, so I didn't really get much feedback at all of any kind, let alone actual images, because I did it on one of our private pages. I probably should have gone on the actual main Outer Circle page and said, hey, show me your bad miniatures from Forge World, but that probably would have been playing a little bit too much into the echo chamber. No, what I wanted to show you today is just some of the poor quality control of either the packaging or the miniatures or even the display pieces coming out of Forge World. Again, just a hint at, hey, maybe this is why things like the recast market are getting so popular, and for people who are in the UK, maybe you can understand the plight of us who are not in the UK. One of the common things that comes up is you show people a poor miniature part or a poor miniature, and they say, you show it to Forge World, and within a day they'll get back to you, and you got a Titan with an air bubble in it, they'll send you a whole new Titan. That is the polar opposite of my experiences and many people here in Australia. We often get maybe that part. When the last book printed for the Horus Heresy, Book 9, there were people who bought the book came and it was delaminated, and you'll see a book like that later on in this. The delaminated books, they didn't have any replacement stock for, so they offered a $20 voucher as compensation to people. $20. It's just not great. So yes, while I'm sure there are people out there who've had just awesome customer service from Forge World, it doesn't always go that way. Like I said, I've had parts mailed to me in an envelope before, and then obviously the part going in an envelope from the UK to Australia isn't exactly treated so well by the mail services who use an elastic band to hold 50 letters together and throw them at your mailbox like they're playing Paperboy. So this box here was sent to me by someone I know, and the box isn't even packaged correctly. The invoice is directly underneath the tape, and the tape doesn't actually seal the two halves of the box. And then we have this one here that was also sent to me this week. This person opened up their box, and Forge World decided, decal sheet that says do not bend is a bit hard to stick in the box, so they just bent the package to fit it into the box. Like, really? Decals are not cheap, especially in Australia. You're running like $40 to $50 on decals now. Here we have one of those delaminated books I was talking about earlier. And as you can see, not great. These are very expensive books, so to see this happening to them is really bad. This one here is a Warhound Titan, and it's basically hollow cast the part. There was a big air bubble trapped within it when they've cast the part. Even though it's a 28mm scale Titan, so quite big, this apparently passed their quality control process, even though you can see that when you hold it up to the light. This is not recast, this is direct from Forge World. You've got instructions here for one of the miniatures, hasn't even printed the model onto it. Thankfully, it's a very easy to build kit, being a Deimos pattern Rhino, but still, not great on the quality control front. This is a very common fault here. I've had it on pretty much all of my Primarchs. It's very rare that I don't have a major casting fault, and in this instance here, it was on essentially every part of the model because all the parts that make up the line share the same mold. And so it was that every single part was misaligned slightly when they put the mold together before casting. And his cloak had big seams down it, the weapons, the arms, shoulders, you name it. And here you have these horrible mold lines. And the problem with these sort of mold lines is they are very hard to get rid of. You do need to be quite a skilled hobbyist to get rid of these, because it's not just a matter of getting a scalpel and rubbing away the line. You end up with a very wide, long, flat area of the greave if you do so. And then the little bits of trim that you see ringing around the greave don't line up either, so you have to now shave those down, which is a very delicate process because these are probably only a few widths of a human hair wide. Something like 1/8 of a millimeter off the top of my head. And when you pay as much money as you do for a Primark, hundreds of dollars, not what you want to be seeing. Here we have a Forge World Emperor's Children Contempted Dreadnought, and as you can see, it is a terrible cast, full of bubbles. I'm guessing they didn't vacuum pressurize it correctly when they poured the mold. That's the only way I could see this happening. But those slots in the top of the shoulder pads that are facing directly at the camera or the screen, those shouldn't be there. That should be flat, pristine plastic or resin. Not to mention all the air bubbles, the porosity in the surface, and no, not a recast. This is it in the legitimate blister pack coming out of Forge World. So that is a major, again, quality control issue. And these are faults you generally do not see even in the lowest quality recasts. So this is a major point of concern. Here we have an Alpha Legion Dreadnought. Again, $100 for one of these Contempted Dreadnoughts. And look at that mold slip there. That is an irrecoverable mold slip. That is not a case of stick it in warm soapy water and scrub it. That is a case of, hey, you've got a massive mold seam running across the Hydra detailing on the sarcophagus, and the trim is so misaligned, you can't just shave that back. You need to putty that to try and fix it. That is terrible, and this is something we're seeing a lot of lately. Of course, the classic Spartan tracks. You can see the mold not aligned correctly all along the top of the tracks, probably due to mold age is my bet. I'm going to guess that this silicone mold here is probably nearing the end of its life, but because the mold is worn and not aligned correctly, it's leaving a visible seam along all the tracks, and then when it gets down to the corner where the mold has to bend around the miniature, when they've released it, they've probably snapped it off, or it didn't even cast correctly in the first place. It's quite a difficult location to cast. Then, of course, here we have some images I took directly off Forge World's website, so you can get an idea for some of the detail problems they have. So, obviously, the masters at Forge World, unlike at Games Workshop, are 3D printed. They 3D print them, and then they make a mold of them. Now, there's two things going on here. First is you'll see that the hand holding the weapon is actually misaligned to the arm. That's because they didn't create enough clearance on the kits, and this is something I've noticed when I've put together several of these kits for myself. None of the arms quite go onto the weapons correctly. What they need to do is scallop out the top of the heavy bolter, missile launcher, plasma cannon, whichever heavy weapon you use. For myself, it's heavy bolters and missile launchers I've used. You have to scallop them out a bit in order for the arm to fit in, especially if they're in Mark III iron armor, because they have quite a thick vambrace, that is the wrist armor. Or the forearm armor is the vambrace, and doesn't fit, so that's a problem. But the second problem is, you'll notice there is a series of vertical lines along that heavy bolter running top to bottom from one end to the other. Those are not induced by how the photo's been taken or some resolution issue. No, those are 3D printing lines. When they made this heavy bolter, it has the 3D printing lines in it. And it's very hard to see in the quality of the video I'm posting, but if you zoom right in on the other heavy bolters in the squad, they all share those same lines. So this is probably a first generation cast with the most detail that they've used for these models, an original master probably. And as you can see, those flaws from the 3D printing, where they've failed to merge the layer heights efficiently, has resulted in that, probably from trying to smash out the part very quickly. We have the same problem here occurring on this Saber tank. So if you look up close on the tracks of the tank and on the little bit of armour that crosses over the top of the tracks in the midsection of the hull, you can see the layer lines running from side to side. And again, same issue here. And those lines translate to the model. Some of the other models I've seen this on include the Derridero Dreadnought and the Kizargan Landspeeder. Wherever you have flat surfaces, it's really noticeable how they've produced the models. That is the big downside compared to traditional 3D sculpting techniques, where a person actually has putty in their hand. When you're 3D sculpting and you have to translate that through multiple machining processes as a medium, you're going to get some degradation of the quality. And of course, the famous one I always like to chuck in is this Imperial Knight from Forge World, and you can see just the layer lines as clear as day on this model. It almost looks like a fingerprint on each of the surfaces. But that's just, again, a translation of the construction medium. And then last out of this batch of bizarre models is these two here, and I had to double take it at first myself, and then I realised the problem when I read the comment. Look at the carriage on the right. The carriage on the right there, very smooth on all the parts, not an excessive amount of mould slip, not huge seams, very few air bubbles, etc. Look at the gun carriage on the left, the cabling on the las cannon, the excessive mould lines on the legs of the weapon, the mould lines on the wheels, the long and jagged, almost hexagonal surfaces along the las cannon. These are two different types of resin. And we're not talking like, oh, it was made in two different batches. I mean, like, one of these, the one on the left, looks like it's almost like a fine cast material, and I had this problem myself years ago. When they first released the Tartarus Terminator armor back in 2011, I bought a set of it. It was one of my earlier Forge World purchases, and when it arrived, I thought, man, Forge World is not very good if all the resin's like this, because I pulled them out, and I swear they were fine cast. The Tartarus Terminators came on sprues, fine cast sprues. And even at that time, I was thinking, man, these guys must be getting folded into Games Workshop if this is what they're making. This is literally fine cast. And yet, I ordered another set of Tartarus armor to replace that terrible, terrible set. And it was the original 2011 era fine cast. Very rubbery, very flexible. If you left these models, and I lived in Townsville at the time, which for those who aren't in Australia, it's kind of like a Florida. Very hot and tropical. In fact, it is literally in the tropics, not probably halfway between the Tropic of Capricorn and the equator. And so these were terrible, and I bought some more Tartarus Terminators, and they came like other Forge World miniatures do on a traditional key, that big block of resin that looks like a concrete block. Yeah, that's a key. So they came on that key, and I couldn't believe it. There was two different molds, two different casting processes at play, and I think the same thing happened here with this particular miniature. On the right, you have a pretty nice cast. Really nice to look at it. On the left, you have a pretty poor quality cast, and it's like it's two different materials. The shrinkage rate is different. You can see, if you look at the las power pack that's sitting on the ground attached to the cabling, you can see it is concaved. It's actually caved in, curved along the edge from the shrinkage of the resin. Terrible quality. And again, the whole point of this segment is just to point out the quality control over at Forge World has gone dramatically downhill in the last few years. And although I could trace the problems back to 2011, I just thought maybe it was an experiment to see what the limitations of Finecast were at the time. They're still doing it now with these kind of quality of miniatures. And that's not good enough. If they want to say that they're the best miniature producing company in the world, I think they kind of have to live by it. Because if they think that recast and such is a problem and endemic, and don't understand why people would do it, this is why. This set of problems I've shown you perfectly exemplifies why people will choose to shop outside of regular Games Workshop, and rather than support the company, they say, well, screw it. If I'm pissing away my money, I'd rather piss it away as little of it as possible. The last thing I want to talk about are the Chaos Dwarf rumours. So the rumour going around that 3 people now have approached me about, the latest one this afternoon on Instagram, said, "Oh, have you heard about these rumours?" I'm, no, what rumours? Oh, just the bring Chaos Dwarf to Age of Sigmar. Well, that I have heard. This is an old school Chaos Dwarf army. Many of these miniatures I actually have in my possession, especially the blunderbusses, the Chaos Dwarves in the bottom right with the big axes, and even the Death Shrieker rocket, but minus the rocket, and the Earthquake mortar, but minus the mortar. I just have the crew, so yeah. I also have a couple of the characters, but anyway. Chaos Dwarves. I have quite a large Chaos Dwarf army, and it's mostly the Tamarkan miniatures from Forge World, as well as some pretty cool ones I got through Etsy. Some really cool stuff I got through Etsy, in fact. And the rumour goes that Games Workshop is currently looking at Chaos Dwarves, and they're going to introduce them in Age of Sigmar as another faction. Well, I could definitely see that happening. So this is your Battle of Lost Souls style rumour. I will try and insert as many commercials as I can directly into this part of the video, even though YouTube just decides to put them in every minute anyway. This, I will put like 50 right now, just so you feel like you're getting the full Battle of Lost Souls or Spiky Bits experience, okay? Yep, cool. Alright. The thing that comes to my mind is I can see them doing it, but I don't see them doing this. Now, what do I mean by this? I don't see them doing the Neo-Assyrian / Babylonian style of Chaos Dwarves. I could see them keeping a lot of that cruel background or backstory, like they're very cruel, they're enslavers, they care little about others. I can see them, however, not keeping the Babylonian, the big hat theme, that kind of thing. What I can see them doing is moving more away from this stuff and more to this stuff. Sort of heavily armoured, clearly more chaotic dwarves, with things like the little bits of stone or chaos spikes jutting from the skin. That style of helmet, maybe not so much, but definitely some sort of very... almost like you took iron breakers from the regular dwarf range and cut away the arm and leg armour, so it was just a really armoured torso and head. I could... this is my thoughts of what they will do. Because Games Workshop wants maximum copyright, and if they do the same thing they've done before, they're not achieving that goal. You see this with the High Elves. They went for a very weird and different aesthetic with those. Maybe some kind of Japanese influences or something in there, or Chinese influences with their little Zen gardens. And yeah, okay, some weird shit happened. With these guys, I can see the same approach. Some Chaos Dwarf, like Smith type units for like their characters. Maybe some Sacrificial Altar type guys who their whole job is to capture enemies to throw in the pits. Slavers, yeah, I can see them doing that stuff. I can't see them doing the traditional Chaos Dwarf infantry with the guns and with the axes. I could see them doing something like this, a sort of berserker style infantry almost, with a little bit of armor, some hand weapons, and then greatly exemplifying the other themes of the Chaos Dwarves, because Games Workshop likes to take a part of a faction and dial it up to 11 with their new releases. So when you had a sort of Medusa or Gorgon type character in the Dark Elf range, that became the Bloodwrath Medusa's faction, you know. The Banshee and Can Wraiths became the Nighthaunt faction. They take part of a faction, dial it up. I could see them taking the artillery aspect of this range and dialing that up to 11 with big custom war machines, very similar to what the Whalers on the Moon, the Caradon Overlord dwarf faction has. But instead of having big blimps up in the sky, we're talking some sort of ground crawling, not a demon engine per se. It won't be all fleshy probably, but definitely some sort of iron, coal, guzzling, smoking, smoke-belching, fire-breathing, mechanical monstrosity, like a World War I era tank. I could see them doing that, and the other thing I see them doing is really amplifying the Kadai aspect. So the Kadai are the the fire elemental kind of creatures that the Chaos Dwarves have demons that they've enslaved into rune-affixed avatars on the mortal plane. Kind of like a demon engine, but a lot more restricted in scope into what it's allowed to do because of the way it's bound. That I can see them exemplifying. So you're talking a range where your Chaos Dwarves make up the little guys in the Force. They make up almost the chaff, you could say, but we're not talking like a lot of them. We're talking a very small elite army here. This is then buffed out with the big nasties, the monstrous creatures, and all that will be like the fire guys, the Kadai Fireborn, Kadai Destroyer, that kind of thing, but reimagined. And then, of course, War Machines, shooting, Daka Daka Daka, something that Age of Sigmar has sort of had problems with implementing efficiently. It always seems to be very unbalanced and broken when you have very shooting-heavy armies in Age of Sigmar, but I could see them going down that artillery route, bringing a lot of that back, again, in the form of some crazy War Machines. So that's what I envisage them doing for the Chaos Dwarves if we were going to take the rumours at face value. That's the sort of thing I see. But I could be totally wrong, and they actually do turn around. They go for, no, we're going to have Chaos Dwarves. They're going to be riding giant winged bulls that breathe fire, and they're all going to have big hats and cool swirly beards, but I really don't see them doing that. I'm really sus on if they'll even do hobgoblins. I highly doubt it. I think they want to keep greenskins as their own distinct factions in Destruction, rather than bringing greenskins in, even as slaves, into the Chaos Dwarf force. I don't see them doing that. They could, but it means creating a bunch of new greenskin models for another faction, and I think they'd be against that in general. They might do a character or two, but that's about it. So there you go. That's some thoughts. Some thoughts on 9th edition for Horus Heresy. Some thoughts on some bad quality control that I've seen in the last week. And some thoughts on if they do Chaos Dwarves for Age of Sigmar. Again, it's definitely something they could do because it's pretty copyright friendly to them. It's not a very explored faction, which means there's a lot of room for them to claim it's their intellectual property and sue the pants off anyone. I'm going to leave it at that. Back with the Outer Circle, please leave me your thoughts and comments below, and I'll see you all on the next one.